In this first lesson of the VITA Basic Tax Law course, we will be covering some filing basics. What forms, who files these forms, and who are they really? Because we need to know to do our job correctly. First, we will look at the 1040 form. This is where individuals report their income. Now you might notice that there's a watermark. This is a draft of the 2021 1040. That's because at the time of this recording, the final form has not yet been released. When you download a draft form from the IRS website, there's a page before the form explaining that this is most likely what it will look like, but it is possible that things could change if there's an unexpected issue or new legislation. Being flexible is just part of working in taxes. Sometimes changes will happen right up into the filing season, like last year's change to the taxation of unemployment when the American Rescue Plan was enacted in March. That's okay. I like to think of it like a house. You might have it repainted from time to time and sometimes need to change the siding or countertops, but probably very rarely remove a load-bearing wall. The structure remains largely the same, and here in our zoomed out view, we are going to look at some of the structures of our form. This first section is for filing status, and we're going to learn more about filing status in our next lesson. But as a taste, a couple of the more common are single and married filing jointly. Then we have a section for personal information and some general questions that affect things later in the return. One of the newer questions is whether you owned virtual currency. Then we have a section for dependents. These are people that the taxpayer supported and most likely lived with them. And here again, we will be learning more about the test to see if somebody qualifies as a dependent in a later lesson. Then we have our section for income. And this is where the structure is a lot like the structure of our intake form, which is purposeful. It mirrors the structure of our tax system. Then we get to adjustments and deductions, and this is a little different than our intake form. Our intake form just says expenses. Adjustments happen right before this really important line, adjusted gross income. And this line can help determine if our taxpayer can take certain credits or have certain benefits. The deductions happen after that line. And again, just like adjustments, they lower the amount of income that will become taxable. The first page of our 1040 ends with the line taxable income. Page 2 of the 1040 begins with tax. Now we spent all of page 1 determining our taxable income, and that's our tax base. So then page 2, the first line is tax from the table, and there are some tables that the IRS publishes that help you determine based on your taxable income what your tax should be. Then there's another line for things like alternative minimum tax. That is out of scope for us, so we don't need to worry a lot about it right now, but just so you know why there's another line. The next section is for non-refundable credits and other taxes. Now, credits lower the amount of tax that you would owe. Non-refundable credits can lower the amount of tax you owe to 0, but they cannot give you any money back if your tax amount is 0. Then there are other taxes, things like self-employment tax, that might need to be added back into your tax. So then you get to the line total tax. After that, you get to figure out what your prepayments were. And this is like when your employer was taking money out of your paycheck as you went. This is where you would put those amounts. Then there are refundable credits, and these are amounts that, like the non-refundable credits, get to lower the amount of tax, but unlike non-refundable credits, if your tax amount is 0, you still get that money back. So after all of these calculations, you've figured out your total tax, and you've subtracted the prepayments that you made, and you've subtracted the refundable credits, and you might be getting a refund, or you might owe some tax at the end of the year and need to pay. Our last section is just signatures and stuff. You have signatures for the taxpayers. You have signatures if somebody else is going to be in contact with the IRS for the taxpayer, and a section for paid preparers. And just so you're aware, as volunteers, VITA volunteers, we are not paid preparers. So that covers our page 1 and page 2, a zoomed out view of our 1040. It is important to know, though, that page 1 and page 2 of the 1040 are not all there is. There are several lines that refer to other schedules. We have 3 main schedules: Schedule 1, Schedule 2, and Schedule 3. Schedule 1 covers additional income and adjustments to income. Schedule 2 covers additional taxes, and Schedule 3 covers additional credits and payments. And just to note that each one of these schedules is 2 pages. So I'm only showing you here the front page, but there is another page, which I have included in our materials. And here you can see that the schedules continue. Now that we've gone through our 1, 2, 3s, it's time for the ABCs. So we have A for things that are itemized deductions, B, interest and ordinary dividends, C is for profit or loss from a sole proprietorship type business, D would be for capital gains and losses, Schedule E is commonly rent and royalties, F is for farming, H is for household employment taxes, J, income averaging farmers and fishermen, R is credit for the elderly or disabled, SE is self-employment tax, EIC is earned income credit, and 8812 is the child tax credit and additional child tax credit. Now, these are not to overwhelm you so much as to give you awareness of what is out there and the kinds of things that can be on a return. Many of these, for instance, Schedule H, are out of our scope, and so we're not concerned with learning about them right now. A couple of the ones that you will see are Schedule EIC for Earned Income Credit and Schedule 8812, the Child Tax Credit and Additional Child Tax Credit. And we will cover those schedules when we cover that topic in a later lesson. After we've sat down with our clients and after we've said things like, "Hi, how are you and how's the weather?" the first thing we need to figure out is whether or not this person is required to file. And there are 3 main drivers of this: filing status, age, and gross income. Chart A from the 4012, tab A, helps us determine this. Because we are getting an early start, VITA has not updated their materials. They usually do this in late October or early November. However, it is possible to get the updated numbers from the IRS website. They are included in Revenue Procedure 2020-45. And as you can see on the right hand, I've added a column with the inflation adjusted numbers for 2021. If we follow the chart, you can see that a single taxpayer who is under the age of 65 will have a filing requirement if their income is at least $12,550. If their income is $12,549 or lower, they would not be required to file. For married filing joint couple, the filing requirement is $25,100. And for head of household, again under 65, the filing requirement is $18,800. And for qualifying widow or widower, the filing requirement will be $25,100, which you see is the same as married filing joint. Remember, we're going to cover more about filing status and determining what filing status our taxpayer will be in the next lesson. Also note that if the taxpayer is 65 or older and they are single or head of household, they get an extra $1,700 added to their filing requirement. For married filing joint, each spouse over 65 gets an extra $1,350. Now these numbers will begin to look very familiar. That's because they are also the standard deduction amounts, which we will cover more in future lessons. Special circumstances might cause a person to have a different filing requirement. For instance, a dependent who is single would be required to file if they had at least $1,100 in unearned income, or if they are working $350 over their earned income. There are other amounts depending on age, whether the taxpayer is blind, or if they are married. These can be found on Chart B of Publication 4012 in Tab A. Self-employment income of at least $400, recapture, or other special taxes will also require a return to be filed. These can be found on Chart C of Publication 4012 in Tab A. Many of these other situations are out of scope for our program, in which case we would inform the client that they are required to file, but should seek the assistance of a paid preparer this year. There is another group of people who are not required to file a return, but who should file anyway. They might have had taxes withheld from their income that entitles them to a refund, or they might qualify for certain credits that could get them money back, such as the Earned Income Credit. Some of our clients might be receiving financial assistance from other organizations. Those organizations might require proof of income, in which case the easiest way to generate that proof is to file an income tax return. Another benefit of filing is identity protection. As we discussed before, when the IRS receives a second tax return using the same tax identification number, it will reject the second return. In this way, the taxpayer prevents the filing of any fraudulent returns later for that same tax year. These and more reasons can be found on Chart D of Publication 4012 in Tab A. As you'll recall from our intake interview and quality review course, we will be verifying identity before we start a return. This includes photo identification for every taxpayer or taxpayers if they are filing jointly. We also need to see a valid tax ID for everyone on the return, so that includes taxpayers and any dependents. Valid IDs include Social Security number. That can be verified using a card, a Social Security Administration letter, or Form 1099 SSA, which reports Social Security income for the year. Another valid ID is the Individual Tax Identification Number, or ITIN, and this can be verified using a card or letter as well. A less common ID would be the Adoption Tax Identification Number, or ATIN. Now remember, taxpayers who can't substantiate their identity are out of scope, and so we very politely refer them to a paid preparer. Now that we've discussed some of the filing basics, here's what I want you to do. Head on over to the Link and Learn website and access the page for this lesson, Filing Basics. I want you to answer the skill check questions. Don't worry, there's only 4. You can find the link to this lesson in our course materials on Asana. Then I want you to begin entering the basic information for our practice returns in TaxSlayer. You can find the materials to do this on Asana. And as always, remember your resources. We have Publication 4012 and Publication 4491, among others. We'll see you next time as we begin discussing filing status.